Well, welcome everybody. My name is Jay Berkowitz, and today we're talking about intake, how to double your conversions. We've got an awesome panel, and I'm just going to share my screen here and set this up. All right, we'll meet the panelists in 1 minute. I just want to, if some of you watch these webinars, and if we've got feedback from folks that watch a lot of our webinars, I think we've had over 350,000 views on the YouTube channel. So if you're a big fan of some of the awesome panels we put together, you definitely want to come to TGR Live, which is our live event. And basically the most, talked about exciting content that we get on our webinars, we ask all those folks to come to our annual conference called TGR Live. It's going to be March 11th and 10th and 11th, 2025. We're at the beautiful Opal Grand Hotel. I was just there this week with our team. We were checking it out, setting things up. We had a couple planning meetings. It's right on the ocean in beautiful Delray Beach, Florida, which is just in between Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach. Where our office is in Boca Raton. So Delray is just adjacent to Boca Raton. Anyways, amazing place, amazing people, amazing facility. We loved everything. Now, some of the keynote speakers, Mike Morse. If you guys haven't heard of Mike, wrote the book Fireproof, $200 million law firm, and one of the first clients of Gino Wickman in the EOS system, the book Traction. He's featured in the books, and he's going to talk about how he built a $200 million law firm. He's also going to sit on our EOS panel. We're going to talk about the entrepreneurial operating system. Andy Sievers is the founder of Case Status. They just won the best tech product at the recent Clio event. Andy's going to do a keynote for us. He's going to talk about startups. He's going to talk about technology. He's going to talk about how to service people once you have clients and this great app they have for law firms. Jeff Hampton, famous on YouTube, over 16 million YouTube views. And he's going to talk about how to absolutely crush your practice with YouTube videos called YouTube Secrets is his presentation. And Greg Crabtree, one of the best presentations I've seen this year. I mean, all these speakers are the greatest presenters that I see at all the conferences, but Greg talks about profit. I mean, what more do we need to know? And we're going to have a whole section on how to run your law firm, business practices, best practices. And Greg is amazing. You're going to absolutely love what he has to say. So please join us. Information available at 10goldenrules.com and TGR Live March 10th and 11th, 2025. So without further ado, let's talk about what we're here for to talk about today, which is intake. And the reason why this is so important and why I picked this topic in this excellent panel is because Google's tracking you now. Like, you can't cheat anymore. You can't fool around with intake, meaning how quickly do you answer the phone and do you miss any calls? Like, this is an actual screenshot from the local service ad program, and the Google Screen local service ads, like, they're actually tracking the calls. And our reps have told us, you only have 15 seconds to answer the phone. And if you miss calls, you're going to get dropped down in the local service ads. Everything I've seen with Google is when they set something up, like when they build something into their algorithm, it generally flows into their other products. So if you're not answering the phone on local service ads, you get dropped down in local service ads. Well, guess what? They're probably tracking you for Google Maps, and they're probably tracking you for general Google SEO. So if you all don't answer the phone and you don't do a good job and you miss calls, guess what? You're going down in the Google rankings and you're not going to show up as much. So this is an instance where they missed a call, no indication of a return call. Here they missed a call twice. It's a wrongful death case. Come on, people, pick up the phone. Here's one where the guy hung up because he was placed on hold for too long. So you got to get this right. You got to answer the phone. You got to treat these people like the gold that they are. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And you want these kind of results. I mean, this is one of our clients. They got 5,600 users to their website. Everything's going up. Everything's in the green. They got 389 leads, and they converted 86 of them to signed cases. So we've got the pros here today. We've got the experts who are going to talk about how to do that. So without further ado, here's the panel. We got Ben Leader and Ben's going to go up first, followed by Chad Kerby from Scalawble and Adam Reiman from LegalSoft. So let me introduce Ben. He's the managing partner at Elrod Pope. They're accident and injury attorneys. And, here's why he's here, okay? I saw an amazing presentation that Ben did about how they went from 165 cases in 2021 to 512 cases in 2023. I mean, that's like a 3x growth. And guess what? They spent less money on advertising and marketing. So the real reason that they performed so much better is they answered the phone better, they converted the leads better, they put a hell of a lot of attention on the intake process. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing somehow, and I'm going to turn things over to Ben, and he's going to tell us how they had this amazing growth with intake.
Go ahead and share my screen as well. You seen everything on your end, Jay?
Yeah, you're ready to go.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Leader, as Jay said, and I'm one of the managing partners here at Elrod Pope Law Firm. We're a personal injury law firm. We're based out of Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is essentially a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. We're just across the border, and we're part of the Charlotte market. It's an honor to be with all of you here today. Thanks to Jay for having me and for 10 Golden Rules for putting this webinar on. I'll be clear from the get-go, I am not an expert. These other panelists are experts and have some great advice to give. I think my role here is more of a what not to do role, and I hope y'all can learn from some of my mistakes and some of our firm's mistakes to ultimately better your firms. But by no means do I consider myself, worthy of being on the same platform as some of these other panelists. But several years ago, our firm painfully realized that we were missing 18% of our incoming calls. 18% of our phone calls were not ever reaching a live person on the phone. We know that this was costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. And today I'm going to go over, how we figured that out and how we ultimately grew our signed case numbers by over 200% in that 2-year period. We've been fortunate enough to experience some significant growth here over the last few years, and we've been able to do that without having to see a significant marketing spend increase to go along with it. And we were able to do this by really pivoting our focus and shifting gears from the mindset we had always had, which was more marketing. How do we spend more money on marketing? What do we spend our next marketing campaign on? And really shift that focus to honing in on our client acquisition process and making that the best process we could. And when I say intake, that's really the heart of what this is client acquisition. And while I can't sit here and, promise that everybody watching this webinar is going to, immediately see a 200% spike in signed cases by optimizing intake, I do truly believe that there are tremendous growth opportunities for each and every firm out there, no matter how big or small you are, purely as it relates to intake and optimizing and improving your intake departments. Just to give a brief background on me, I was born in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I went to Clemson. I went to law school at Campbell Law School in Raleigh, North Carolina. Clerked for a local circuit court judge for a year after law school, best year of my life. And then started working for Elrod Pope in 2014 as an associate attorney. I currently serve as one of the managing partners, and in that role, I get to oversee the marketing and intake side of the firm, which I really enjoy. And I found out, that's really what I'm passionate about. Some lawyers love to be in front of a jury arguing a closing argument, but for me, I really do geek out over intake and optimizing our processes and systems and our procedures. And I've found that the business side of the firm appeals to me much more so than the practice side does a lot of days. The last photo there on the right is me standing next to my best friend, my mentor, who's also my dad. I've been very fortunate enough to get to work with him and get to learn the practice of law from him over the last decade. Brief background on our firm. We've got 8 attorneys here. We've got around 18 full-time staff members. We're in our 44th year of business. So we've seen a lot of changes over the years, and we've somehow been able to adapt and continue to stick around. When I joined the firm in 2014, we were signing on average 165 cases a year every year. That continued through 2021. We were consistently right around 165. And during that period, our success and our profitability often hinged on these large outlier settlements. We would have great years where we would have a seven-figure settlement. We'd have terrible years when we wouldn't, and there was really no in between. It was either times were great or times were terrible, and it was like, many in the practice of law, it was just a roller coaster, and we were kind of just hanging on for the ride. But in 2022, something changed. And that year we went from 165 to 363 new cases. Notably, we did not increase our marketing budget at all that year. We actually pulled back some of those funds. We had a failed marketing campaign the year prior, which was probably the best bad decision we ever made, because it allowed us to say, we already spent this money on a failed marketing campaign. Let's shift it over to intake and see what happens. So we reallocated some of the resources we normally would put towards marketing. We put those towards building an intake team. And this year, we signed 165 and then 363, and then we went to 512 in 2023 based on those same measures that we took in 2022 to grow. This year, we're on pace to sign 600 new cases up. We've continued to grow. We've got more competition than we've ever had before. A lot of national law firms are in our market now, but intake has really been an incredible opportunity for us to compete and scale at a much lower cost than I think advertising would take. And so what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to share 6 key takeaways that I believe helped fuel our 200% plus growth over the last few years. And in order to do that, I think it's important to give full perspective and go back to December of 2021, just to take a snapshot of where our firm was at that time. Like many small personal injury firms, COVID was a particularly bad year for us. I think no cars on the road for a period of time. We felt the sting of that in terms of declined revenue and in terms of declined signed cases. And I want to say 2020 was the worst year we had since I joined the firm, if not the second worst year over that 8-year period. Unfortunately, 2021 was even worse for us. All of the trackable metrics we were tracking at the time, which wasn't nearly enough, were all moving in the wrong direction. We had a multi-year decline in signed cases, a multi-year decline in revenue. And most importantly, we didn't have any reliable marketing data to base our decisions on. We had been in existence for 40 plus years as a firm, yet we had no marketing data compiled, to guide our decisions. We had no idea what was working, what wasn't working. We simply didn't know our numbers at the end of the day. We knew we had good lawyers. We knew we had lawyers who had experience in the courtroom, knew how to try cases, knew how to work cases properly. And we honestly thought that was enough. And in our minds, we thought we were signing most of the cases that we wanted. And we didn't realize there was even leakage or missed opportunities. And looking back, we could not have been more wrong about this. So let's fast forward 1 year later, December 2021, things are very bleak. We've been around 40 years, and I'm starting to have some sleepless nights and question, are we going to be around still in 2 to 3 years at this pace? And 2022, we saw a 120% signed case increase up to 363. And then we also saw an 81% revenue increase that year. Most notably, we didn't spend more money on marketing, and we actually did not sign a single 7-figure case that entire year, or resolve one, sorry. That was the first time since I've been at the firm that we were profitable without having a 7-figure case. 2 years later, December of 2023, year over year, we saw another 41% signed case increase and a 31% revenue increase. And these numbers, are important statistics, but they're much more than that. They also represent hundreds of clients that we were able to help, and millions of dollars to them and to our bottom line at the end of the day as a result of this growth. And so how did we do it? How did we manage to double our case signups without spending more money on marketing? I know that it sounds too good to be true. It sounds like it may have involved snake oil or magic, but it was really very simple. And it was all about eliminating the friction in our intake department. This was the one big thing, without a doubt, that I would credit to fueling our growth over the last few years. So what I've got today is 6 key takeaways to help you remove the friction in your intake department. Many of you are probably already doing a lot of these things, and that's great. I'm hopeful that everybody who's with us today and watching this webinar may be able to walk away from this and have at least 1 or 2 key takeaways to take back and implement at your firms to help remove friction. at the very least, it's my hope that my presentation today will encourage everyone to view client intake and client acquisition from a different lens than most lawyers are accustomed to seeing it through. So the first key takeaway is an obvious one. You have got to be willing to invest in your intake. This was something we never did prior to 2021. Really didn't even have a concept of what intake was, prior to that. I now view intake as one of the key pillars of our firm. I view it as just as important as marketing. And so I think you have to view intake the right way, to be willing to spend the resources and the money that it takes to have a successful intake department. And you have to have an intake team. Want to give a quick shout out to my intake team. I believe you got to invest in an intake team and intake software. This is our team here. These ladies are incredible at what they do. They've been a huge part of our growth and our success. And I would not be sitting here today speaking on this webinar, but for how incredible our intake team is. And whoever your team is, they must be 100% dedicated to intake. A lot of people make the mistake of trying to put somebody in charge of intake who also has other roles at the firm. And I think that's a recipe for a disaster. You got to have somebody that's willing to eat, breathe, sleep, intake around the clock and make that their only job at the firm. And while this does come with a cost, I believe that it's the best return on investment that you'll ever see at your law firm. Good intake team members can make, or bad ones can lose law firms more money than any attorneys realize. And in addition to having the right people in place, you have to have the right tools in place too. You got to give them the tools they need to be successful. Prior to 2022, we had no intake team. We had no intake software. Our intake process was really just whatever attorney or paralegal may have been available on any given day to be forced to take a call they really didn't want to deal with. And it was just a train wreck at the end of the day. We had no, tracking of our marketing data. We tried to use a case management system to do that, and it just wasn't designed to do that. So we brought on Lead Docket right as we brought on an intake manager to start our department. It allows me to make data-based marketing decisions that I was not able to make before. 3 years ago, I couldn't tell you where our cases were coming from. What was working well, what wasn't. We just assumed if we were spending money on something, that's probably where the cases were coming from. And now at the click of a few buttons in Lead Docket, I can tell you, we signed 7 cases last month from our Lake Wiley Google, My Business satellite profile, or, we got 7 calls from our last quarterly newsletter. You can really hone in on where your leads and your cases are coming from. If you spend any money at all on advertising your law firm, I think you owe it to yourself to track this data and to track the return on that investment. Lead Docket is one of those things I just don't know how we lived without it. And same with an intake team. When we brought Michelle on to start our intake department, we were concerned that we didn't even have enough volume to keep her busy. We felt like we were probably hiring before the need really arose, and we couldn't have been more wrong. Within a year, we brought Reese on, another full-time intake coordinator to help Michelle, just because we grossly underestimated, the volume that we were receiving. So I think that they will be far busier than most people anticipate they will. Lead Docket, even if you're not ready to hire an intake person or build an intake team, I still think Lead Docket is an incredible tool and would highly recommend considering using it. I think it's very reasonably priced. Just to show you a few things that it does for us. This is just some screenshots that I took today. The chart on the left just shows our Google LSA ads and our signed leads year over year by signed up category. And so you can see the blue wave is this year, and you can see the improvement year to year, and you can really measure, okay, this is working well. We're getting a good return on this. Let's pivot and push more resources towards LSAs when they're working. The chart on the right just breaks down our revenue by our marketing sources. And again, just gives you a good idea of, which marketing pieces are driving your revenue. And it's not always going to be the same that are driving the most signed cases. And so I always find this piece very insightful to figure out where's our revenue coming from, which I think is much more important than where our signed case volume coming from. So you got to have the tools and the people in place. Next, you have to have an intake audit done. I think this is a non-negotiable. If you're attending this webinar, you're probably aware that there are companies out there that specialize in helping law firms with intake. 3 years ago, I had no clue that was the case. And if somebody would have asked if we worked with an intake optimization company, I probably would have laughed, just having no idea what that even was. But if you walk away from this presentation today and decide to do one thing that I talk about, I highly recommend having an audit completed. I think you can have a high quality audit done for several $1,000s most likely, and the return on investment just from that audit report alone will be tenfold, what you're investing for that. Just learning where these cases are falling through the cracks and what other cases you may be able to capture that you're missing. We had an audit done in the spring of 2022, and this never gets any easier or more enjoyable to talk about, but the results were simply jaw-dropping. Some of my law partners would probably describe them as vomit-inducing even. It was really just shocking. We used a company called Legal Intake Pros. Yanni Smith runs that company, and what they did is they monitor our calls, our leads. They watched our intake department from a distance and watched their every move, their every step for a month straight. They tracked everything, and then they reported, the detailed findings back to us. They also mystery shopped our firm and other firms, and ultimately put together a thorough analysis of, what our strengths and weaknesses were compared to other competitors. And what we ultimately learned from the audit is, again, pretty shocking that we were missing 18% of our incoming calls. Missed call percentages was something we had never tracked prior to this. We are now consistently in the 3% range and always trying to improve, but we were missing 18% of our incoming calls. The month that we had that audit done, over half of those missed calls were first-time callers. And so we were constantly focusing on why our marketing wasn't working. And what we really realized is the marketing wasn't the problem. We were spending all this money to attract all these leads to take action and contact us, and we were completely dropping the ball on being able to handle them. We just didn't have the infrastructure in place. A big problem for us was not necessarily us not answering the phone, but it ringing for too long, and callers eventually just abandon those calls and hang up if they're put on hold or left on hold for too long. And we also learned that there were a number of calls that we tracked that never made it into lead docket, and so we realized that a number of our leads were not being entered into the system, which is a huge problem. And so it never makes me any happier to look at these numbers and talk about this, and to think about over the course of 3-4 decades how much business we left on the table for people that were trying to get us to help simply by botching the intake process. And so in order to identify the friction areas at your firm, I think a great starting point is to have an audit done of your intake process. I recommend this to everybody. There's a number of companies out there that can do it, and I have yet to encounter one person that has come back to me and wasn't blown away by the results. Another thing that I really strongly believe it's worth investing in is hiring an intake optimization company. Making the decision to work with an intake consultant was one of the most impactful decisions our firm has ever made. We would have never known these problems existed. We would have never known our missed call percentages, but for diving into that audit and letting them help us, fix these problems. Again, we work with Legal Intake Pros. I think they're great. We still work with them because we see such tremendous value in constantly improving our intake process and staying on top of, innovations and advances in intake. They've helped us with so many facets of our firm in general, but some specific examples I can give is they've trained our receptionist, they've trained our intake coordinator, they've helped us create manuals to systemize those roles and to expedite the onboarding of those roles. They've helped us integrate our lead management system, Lead Docket, with FileVine, our case management system, so everything flows smoothly between those two. And they've helped us meticulously track all of our marketing data as well and make sure that's set up properly so that we can get an accurate ROI on those expenses. At the end of the day, they hold us accountable. They hold our intake team accountable. And I view their role as somewhat of a fractional director of intake, essentially. And it's been a huge part of our success. Just a couple of examples of companies I am aware of. Again, we work with Legal Intake Pros. Love them. I've also heard of a number of firms working with Kerry James on the intake side of things. I know there's a number of other really good companies out there that work on intake, but these are two that I feel comfortable mentioning is good options that I think would be worth consulting with if this is something you decide is worth considering. So one of the big things that we've done with our intake consultant is focusing on improving our conversion rates. And if you're not sure what your conversion rate is, or if you're not tracking this, you are probably leaving a lot of money on the table. This chart just shows some of the improvement our newest intake coordinator has seen in her conversion rate since we started working with a consultant. And all of last year, she converted 60% of her wanted leads. And this year, she's on pace to convert roughly 80% of those leads. Just pure based on math, and our average fees and the volume that she handles, this 20% increase in her conversion rate should ultimately equate to an anticipated, revenue boost of over $800,000 for our firm. And again, these were leads we were already paying for, we were already attracting to our firm that we just weren't signing up, and just going from 60 to 80%, yields 800 plus in revenue for, and the cost of doing that is just a small fraction of that return. Increasing, her conversion rate has alone been a game changer this year. And we've done that with both of our intake team members. And, we hope to eventually get them in the 90% range. It's much harder said than done, I think. A lot of people think they're in the 90s, but I've found that, there's usually a lot of leakage that they're not aware of in that scenario. So couldn't be higher on an intake company and everything they've done to help our firm. Second key takeaway I want to talk about is minimizing paralegal and attorney involvement in the process. This can be a difficult concept to grasp and somewhat of a hot topic for some people, because most attorneys believe that they are the best closers and that they should be intricately involved in the client acquisition process. And we found that that's simply not true, that trying to force attorney over involvement actually does the opposite, and drags out the process and may result in even more missed opportunities and more leakage. I think this is the case for a number of reasons. One being that attorneys are just terrible at following up for the most part. If an attorney is responsible for chasing a lead or following up with a lead, and they make one phone call and that person doesn't answer, chances are that firm's not going to sign that case. They're going to move on and get busy and focus on something else. Attorneys are also extremely busy. It's very hard to get a consultation scheduled on immediate notice, and oftentimes it results in that potential client being pushed out hours or even days, from the time they call. And they don't want to wait 3 days to meet with an attorney. They want somebody to help them right then and there, whether it's a paralegal or an intake person or an attorney. They just want their questions answered. And this probably isn't news to anyone, but paralegals do not like doing intake either. It's usually not their primary job, and it's usually not their top priority. And if they're in the middle of doing something busy, it's impossible for them to ignore that bias and just shift gears and flip a light switch and focus on intake. At the end of the day, if you're asking paralegals and attorneys to disrupt their, day-to-day work and to start handling intake calls, signing that case is not going to be a top priority. For decades, that's how we did it. We relied on busy paralegals and busy attorneys, and this resulted in significant leakage, poor follow-up, and friction every step of the way with our intake process. There are always going to be exceptions where you want your named partner to be having FaceTime with a client in a catastrophic injury case or whatever the circumstances may be. But as a general rule, we've found letting your intake people focus on intake and let your attorneys and paralegals focus on what they do is the best recipe for success for us. And removing them from the process to the extent you can, it has been a huge step in the right direction for our firm. Key number 3 is very simple. I joined a PILMA mastermind group a few years ago, and one of the first things that dawned on me was that everybody else was incentivizing their intake teams, and motivating your intake team with performance-based incentives works. We do this a number of ways. We've got team goals where every intake team member receives set bonus thresholds if they sign certain numbers of cases as a collective group. We found that builds camaraderie between them and doesn't necessarily result in the interdepartmental competition. We also have individual goals tied to their conversion rates, where if they exceed 70% in a quarter or a year, they receive certain amounts of bonuses, and if they receive 80% conversions throughout the year, they get a nice bonus at the end of the year. And so we found that's highly motivated our team to perform, and we've seen a direct correlation with these incentives and the results. You have to keep them hungry and motivated. Intake, in my opinion, is one of probably the roles of a law firm with the highest burnout rate. It's very difficult to keep people in that role. It takes a lot of time and energy and sucks a lot of life out of them. And so keeping them hungry, keeping them motivated, coming up with creative ways to incentivize them is key. Key number 4, enter every single lead into your system. This sounds so simple, but so many firms screw this up. This is the big one that I think gets overlooked that costs no money to implement. Simply put, every lead that your firm receives from every case type, every marketing source, should be entered into a central lead management system. There cannot be any exceptions to this rule. The second you start making an exception and not enter a crappy lead because it's a bad case and you're not going to follow up with them and waste the time to enter that, more exceptions are going to follow. And eventually you're going to see your team starting to only enter wanted leads into the system. And I think it's just as important to have those unwanted leads tracked as it is the wanted leads. It's crucial to know how many wanted versus unwanted you're receiving. It's crucial to know which of your campaigns are yielding unwanted leads. And if a certain campaign is resulting in nothing but, crappy medical malpractice leads, that's something you need to know. And if those aren't entered into the system, you're never going to have that accurate data captured. And this rule, again, it's so easy to take home and implement, but it does require 100% strict compliance. And I've heard some firms feel so strongly about this that if they find out that a single lead is not been entered into a system, it's a fireable offense. And so I just think that data is so important, and that just shows, how crucial it is, even though it may feel like a waste of time. As far as the big picture goes, it's crucial to have an accurate picture. Key number 5 is to listen to your phone calls. This is probably one of the most painful tasks I've ever done as a law firm partner. If you've never listened to your phone calls, you need to. If you've never listened to your phone calls, I guarantee you are leaving money on the table. It was an extremely humbling experience, to say the least. I learned how to listen to calls, and I came back and pulled up Google LSA and started listening to calls for about 10 minutes. And, again, felt like I was going to throw up. It ultimately led to us having to terminate employees. It led to us switching our call service and our after hours and overflow answering service. And we made some very big decisions, based on listening to those calls and what we heard. We now rely heavily on call monitoring and quality control. And I think that's absolutely critical in today's world. It's actually quite simple to listen to your phone calls. There's 3 easy ways of doing that. We pay an intake optimization company to do this for us. I've found this task to just be downright miserable and extremely time consuming, and it's just not something I can stomach. So we pay somebody to do it for us, and I think it's well worth every penny to do that. There's also several ways. You've probably got resources that you can do this yourself without having to pay anybody. One is through Google LSAs. If you log into the Google LSA account, you should be able to listen to those calls through Google. And that's how I did it the first time, was just listening to LSA calls. We also use CallRail. It's an extremely useful tool and a great way to monitor and listen to your calls. You can track your missed calls this way. You can track your call volume and your call sources as well. There's all sorts of new AI platforms out there that will monitor your calls and even rate them and rank them and score them. There's tons of resources out there, and you can listen to your calls for very minimal amounts of spend. Call control matters, and you really never know you have an issue until you start listening to these calls. Key number 6, and the final key takeaway I wanted to mention today, is to eliminate the bias. This has more to do with your mindset than anything else, in my opinion. And there's so much bias ingrained into the practice of law, just in general, but in particular into the client acquisition side of it. Intake isn't just answering the phones. It's the front line of your firm. It's your sales department. And in my opinion, it's the foundation of your firm's success. And if you treat it that way, the results are going to follow. If you're still treating it as an afterthought, you're leaving money on the table. I truly believe that optimizing intake is the fastest and most cost-effective way to grow and scale a law firm. I know we're short on time today, and I'm standing in between everybody else and some really great speakers who I'm excited to hear from. Please email me, connect with me in any way you can. I'm more than happy to chat, answer any questions anyone has. Would love to find a way to work together. I started by telling y'all that, we missed 18% of our calls and left hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table. every year for decades. And today we've grown over 200% since then. And we did that simply by focusing on what was already right in front of us, and that was our intake. Our growth didn't come from flashy ads or bigger budgets. It came from reducing friction internally and treating our intake department like the sales department that it really is. Listen to your calls, track your leads, audit your processes. You'll be amazed at how much untapped potential is already in front of you and already in the door at your law firm. As I mentioned, we operate in the Carolinas. We would love an opportunity to work as co-counsel on any personal injury matters in the Carolinas. Would love to connect with anybody who's got any questions from the webinar. And thanks again for having me, Jay. Hope everyone was able to at least get something of value from this today.
Ben, that was awesome. And thank you so much. And congratulations on your success. I do have a couple quick questions. And so
Sure.
I always sneak in a little bit. And then we'll take questions from the entire panel at the end and take questions from the audience, of course. So you mentioned Lead Docket and the Lead Docket software. And Lead Docket was purchased by Filevine. Filevine's a case management system. And I'm sure many of you listening know that. But what's the role of Lead Docket? Like, it fits in the middle. It manages the leads. Explain how y'all use it and what folks should look for in that sort of interstitial in between the call and the case management.
Yeah, the way I look at it is Lead Docket is your entire front end, operations. It's where your marketing and your intake culminates and comes together. And in my opinion, once a contract is signed and once you have a retained client, that's when Filevine comes into play. And that's when, they transition from Lead Docket to Filevine and we start working their case, using the case management system. For years, we tried to make Filevine work for leads. And it just created problems. We had people in Filevine that weren't clients, that were potential clients. We tried to enter marketing data into Filevine, and at the end of the day, that's just not what it's designed to do. And so Lead Docket is where, the first contact's made with our firm. We have as many automations as possible so that person automatically pops up in Lead Docket. And it keeps, a tab on what the status of them is, how many times have we contacted them. We have certain protocols in place where we will chase a lead, within certain parameters and make several attempts. And, when we first started our intake team, Michelle used to just carry around a yellow pad, and that was our Lead Docket. And now any of us have real-time access to see these leads at any point in time. And if she's out sick, another intake coordinator can pick up on that lead and chase that prospect and try to get them in the door. So I view it as very much, complementary pieces that do different things from a front end standpoint and a case management standpoint.
Awesome. Thank you. And one other question. You mentioned that, you don't love listening to calls. It's a little painful, especially when they're not handled really, really well. I imagine it's a lot easier to listen to calls now than it was 2 years ago before your team got trained up. But in terms of your consultant, how many calls are they listening to? What feedback do they give you? What's the cadence on the feedback? Are they regularly coaching your team?
They are. So they meet every other week with our team and provide coaching. I receive copies of the scores if they're below a certain threshold. The team gets copied if they're, if they handle a lead extremely well, receive an extremely high score. The intake team or consultants will notify them and, congratulate them on that. And if it's less than desirable score, I'll take a look at it first and kind of evaluate, is this really an us problem or possibly, a disgruntled prospect problem, and, kind of evaluate whether it's worth taking any further action. But they're routinely monitoring a number of calls for us every month. We get scorecards, completed on those calls. And so we're able to keep a pretty good pulse on, how things are going based on those scores. And, Ring Central also has some automated rankings where they can note that a call was favorable or unfavorable and things like that. And so, with all the kind of pieces to the puzzle, we're able to kind of keep a good pulse on, are they being as sympathetic as we would like them to be? And we've even had, consultants tell us that, we've noticed a little bit of drop off in some of the sympathy side, with this increase in volume that they're now handling. And so I would like to think there's an end in sight, but for me, there's always going to be improvement opportunities in intake. And, we're never going to get to a point where we're saying this is content, this is working. We are just always going to be tweaking and finding ways to do things differently.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Don't go anywhere. Stick around. And I think I dropped one of the biggest things that I was going to talk about. Ben's actually agreed. He has a much longer version of his presentation. He's agreed to join us at TGR Live. So if you enjoyed just a little bit of, really the hands-on expertise from someone in-house doing this for real, not that the consultants coming up, these guys are awesome professionals, but Ben's going to join us at TGR Live March 10th and 11th in Delray Beach, Florida. So without further ado, let me grab the screen back here and introduce Chad Kerby. And Chad's a longtime, law firm marketing expert and, business of law expert. And his partner Gary's with us today too. I think Chad's going to take the lead on the presentation. These guys have developed a company called Scalawble, and it's a tool. There's sales training, because Ben touched on a little bit, but like when a call comes into your firm, you've got to convert those calls, and there's sales skills to that. And so they've got a sales process training, software. And without further ado, Chad, welcome to today's webinar.
Jay, it's fantastic to be with you. But before I jump into what I'm going to share, I do want to just point out a couple of things. Ben was very humble in the way he started his presentation, but the content you shared, Ben, was absolutely phenomenal. And so I just want to make sure, reiterate that everyone that was listening, you started out with this phrase that I hope everyone wrote down, which was remove the friction from intake. Ben, that's such a powerful statement. Remove the friction from intake, because Gary and I have the opportunity to sit front and center on law firms in their intake. And it's incredible to see how much friction there is when it comes to intake. Just a couple of weeks ago, I secret shopped 30 law firms. And these were larger law firms, right? The law firms that a lot of people set up as the beam, the light, the goal, and the calls, Ben, the friction involved was painful. And I just thought, when you use that phrase, remove that friction, I thought, oh my goodness, I hope everyone's writing that down. And then you followed up, Ben, and you said, I invest and am as focused on intake as I am marketing. It's interesting you say that, because a lot of people say to themselves, okay, I got to invest more in marketing. In fact, Gary and I have sat down with law firms and said, okay, we think you should actually invest less in marketing and spend more time here on intake. And then they go, no, I don't think, because it goes contrary to what they feel in their hearts. I mean, Jay, everyone listening right now, I could ask them, and if I could see their faces, I'd say, how many of you have ever thought to yourself, okay, if I just invest more in marketing, I just invest more in marketing? How many of you have thought that and yet ignore what Ben just shared? And it's so powerful, Ben. And then the importance of tracking and really have that training that's happening, and calls that are listened to. And Gary and I, we have a solution that we use to listen to every single call and to train daily. That training, Ben obviously is a big sports fan, as are Gary and I. And when we talk about training, Ben, we'll say, baseball players that are professionals go out before every game and have batting practice, right? And then the intake team, we're just like, hey, go do that. And there's not any sort of practice. And so what you shared was absolute gold. And I hope everyone took a lot of notes there, because the content was absolutely phenomenal. And so as we jump into this, though, and what we do over at Scalawble is we really believe that there's only two ways to operate your firm, and that is strategically and opportunistically. And when I get up in front of, when I'm speaking at a conference, I get up, I'll say, how many of you know the two ways to operate your firm? It's strategically or opportunistically. Then I'll follow up with, most people operate how? And in almost all cases, everyone's saying, oh, opportunistically. They're hoping everything happens, hoping everything works out. In fact, Adam Reiman, who will be speaking here in a moment, says, hope is not a business plan, right? And so we have to be more strategic in the way we're thinking about things. So I'm just going to talk real quickly in the time I have about 5 specific KPIs that should be measured by your intake team. Now, Ben brought up the importance of tracking, making sure everything gets tracked, because whatever you track will grow. In fact, a good friend of mine says, be careful what you track because it will always grow, right? And if you're always focused on negativity, it's amazing how negative your life becomes. If you're always focused on positivity, it's amazing how positive your life comes, especially as we think about gratitude, typically this time of year. When we think about being grateful, it's amazing how much we acknowledge that which we have. So we're going to talk for just a few minutes on what 5 specific things you can really track to grow your firm, specifically as we talk about intake. And number 1 is this: your lead conversion rate. Now, Ben talked a lot about how everything started to change when he really started looking at the lead conversion rate and having an understanding. I mean, think about it for a moment. We hear attorneys say to us all the time, and I'm sure, Ben, you heard this too. People say, I close every deal I want, right? I close every deal I want. And you're like, really? Do you know every deal you want? Well, yeah, every deal I want. Because I promise you, there are those that are slipping through your fingers. For example, when I referenced earlier, I was talking about, I was doing the case study for those 30 law firms. Ben, imagine this for a moment. I called these personal injury firms. They were all personal injury firms. I called them and I told them that I had just been rear-ended by an Amazon delivery truck. He was texting while he was driving. I was transported by ambulance to the hospital. And every single one of those people, every single intake specialist, like, okay, one individual said, oh, we want this case. We want this case, right? At the end of it, I said the same thing every time, Ben. I said, let me call a few more attorneys. And without fail, each intake specialist said, okay. And I'm sitting there going, oh my goodness, I can't believe this. Track those lead conversion rates and it will be game changing. I promise you, all the attorneys that were there in those firms were like, oh, we close every case we want. You wanted that case. Now, once those law firms heard about what happened, they certainly had a different reaction that I won't go into right now. But number 1, make sure you are tracking those lead conversion rates. Number 2, the average response time. How many of you, thinking to yourself, know that you could probably improve your average response time? Because the reality is, you improve your response time, you will improve KPI number 1, your conversion rate. It's crazy. Of all those 30 firms I called, I should say 1 did respond. And they said, we're no longer going to follow up with you. So no one followed up with me. No one. And I promise you, many of these firms are spending well over 7 digits a year in marketing. And they didn't even respond. So KPI number 2, your average response time. Number 3, follow-up rate. Okay. Number 3, are you tracking your follow-up? Follow-up is key. As I mentioned just a moment ago, everyone said, oh, yeah, this is a great case. This is a great case. Yet nobody did any sort of follow-up. And Ben talked about why people don't follow up when everyone knows that it's something we should do. But he talks about it. He talks about it's just a lack of prioritization. You know, they have inefficient systems and processes. They just don't have the process in place. Ben's talking about his intake team leader walking around with a yellow pad. Okay. That sounds really great. Maybe it doesn't, but the reality is things were slipping through the cracks. And so Ben told us he's spending less money on marketing and increasing the revenue of the firm. How many of you would love to spend less money on marketing and increase your revenue? I mean, that's key, having those right processes in place, and then resistance to change. You know, Gary and I talk all the time that you have to train regularly. And we obviously at Scalable, we have a system in place that helps you do the role playing and the training. So it happens regularly. So people have that type of experience, but you can't be resistant to that changed. And then people are frankly overwhelmed. You know, they're overwhelmed. So we have attorneys that will come and say, come, Chad, Gary, you guys are the best there is. Come train our intake team. And then they don't want a system or a process in place. So then they just get overwhelmed. Because when I ask attorneys, how many of you love sales and marketing so much that you went to law school? Guess how many attorneys I have raise their hand and say, yes, I love sales. That's why I became an attorney. It doesn't happen. And so they become overwhelmed. And that's why when you leverage Scalable, it takes away that overwhelm. Then this, and Ben taught, I think, this so well. There's misalignment in marketing and intake goals. We focus so much on those marketing goals and yet let intake slip through the cracks. And then, of course, the communication barriers, they come into place. A lot of attorneys, I'm telling you, and I shouldn't say a lot. Let me just say 99.9% of them in their follow-up, when Gary and I do an audit of their follow-up system, their emails consist of, those that are doing follow-up, their emails consist of, hey, we're still here for all your needs. Please call us. As though people had forgotten that you were a law firm, right? But once we switch that and we send them valuable assets, things, hey, there's something you should know about your case, and you give them value, you will be stunned. Our clients at Scalable are stunned when they go, oh my goodness, people are actually reaching back to me. I'm like, well, yeah, because your emails don't consist of, hey, I'm still here. Hey, by the way, I'm still here, you know? And so then I ask them, are you following up? Yes, I'm following up with the powerful, I'm still here. Well, no one cares because everyone's favorite subjects themselves. And so when you are following up with them, they have to feel, oh, it's me. Okay, this is all about me. Guess what? Ben, I know Ben does this. Ben's favorite subject is my favorite subject, me. And that has to be felt throughout the follow-up. Now, KPI number 4, which is critical, the appointment scheduling rate. Are you measuring this? Are you measuring what's happening there? Are your leads taking the next step? Think about all of those calls I made to those firms. Which intake specialist is helping them make the next step? Because I promise you this, nobody is saying to themselves, I am bored today. I would love to call multiple law firms. Nobody is saying that. People have a problem and they want it resolved. That's it. They want it. They have a problem and they want it resolved. How many of you have had a problem, whether it be plumbing, you need an appliance fixed, and you call and you get a voicemail, and then you have to call someone else and they're like, I'll get back with you. And you're like, I just want my oven fixed. I just need my faucet to quit leaking, whatever it is. We make it simple because there is a very real, true principle. It will not be put on my gravestone, but if I did have a quote, it would be. And that says this: people, and it was Bertrand Russell said years and years ago, people would rather die than think. They would rather die than think. Nobody wants to think. They just want to make it very, very simple. So make it simple for them. And that KPI number 4, make it very simple for them. How many of you know that you've made intake too complicated at times? How many of you know that you could have more clients convert, more PNCs convert if you made it simpler? I am convinced that Cheesecake Factory would be more successful if they would just shorten and make that menu smaller. People sit down at a Cheesecake Factory, and if you've never been there, just trust me, their menu is a book. It's a novel. And sometimes you just sit down there and you just get overwhelmed with, oh my goodness, all these choices. And then you make a choice and then someone walks by with a different plate and you're like, maybe I should have chose that. We have to make it very simple and make sure you're tracking those appointments. And then lastly, that cost per lead conversion. And Ben talked about this. Are you maximizing your marketing spend? How many of you have ever thought to yourself, I think this marketing might be working, or I hope this marketing is working, or maybe this marketing is working? I've talked to attorneys and I said, what's this line item? And they said, well, we're doing this marketing over here. And they'd say, oh, I said, well, is it working? I don't know. Well, maybe we should reallocate that money. Well, no. Why? It might be, and that's how too many of us approach our marketing efforts directly connected to lead conversion. So with that being said, as you really focus on those 5 KPIs, and as what Ben said, the importance of having an audit. Make sure you have an audit. Now, Jay, because of who you are in your community, anyone that's listening to this webinar that emails me, Chad@Scalawble.ai, we will do a free intake audit for you. We understand what should be happening. We understand what works and what doesn't. So email me, Chad, CHAD, at Scalawble.ai, and just put audit there. And those, they're a few $1,000 audits, but we'll do it for free if you email me directly and just put audit there. So always, always great to be with you, Jay. Ben, I absolutely loved your presentation. Email me and we'll do an audit for you so that you can start enjoying. Look at Ben. Look at how happy. I'm just sitting there looking at he's on top of the world. He's just smiling. Life is good. We want to be like Ben. We want to feel like that. He's just back there rejoicing in Clemson's victories. And now he rejoices in his law firm victories because he took that crucial step of doing the audit. So email me, Chad at Scalawble. Scalawble's on Gary's screen there. You can see how to spell it, .ai. So
Chad, I love that. By the way, is your offer available to non-law firms? Like, can you audit our intake as well?
It's crazy, Jay.
I like the price.
It's
free. I like that. So
well,
quick summary on what you said, because you mentioned a very similar version of what my coach Josh Nelson talks about, and I actually found out that Josh got this from my EOS implementer,
interesting.
Gerardo, and Gerardo got it from Jack Welch. But this is my version of it. What gets measured gets attention and improves. What gets measured gets attention and improves. And so you talked about the KPIs, like the key numbers
right
that you've got to track. And you talked about tracking lead conversion rate. So I would add, you got to track how many leads you get, where they come from. So we track that, like and we want to differentiate too, because obviously a referral is going to convert much better than someone coming from a Google ad. And SEO typically converts even better than the Google ads, but that's another level of detail.
Well, and what's important to note there, Jay, is that if you're not training, like one thing that's important is like, yeah, go do it. If you don't give anybody the path to be successful, they become super frustrated. And so we use what we call the daily practice partner. and it role plays with the intake specialist
Cool.
and then gives them a score. And so then they can see
Another tracking metric.
yeah. And then they can see, okay, here's where I'm at. This is where I need to be. And they role play every day, to a few minutes every day, to become exceptional. And then they can progress along the path. And so it just doesn't happen by accident.
The other thing that you said is, you said, and I've heard this 1,000 times, we close not like 97% of all the deals we want. But, you pointed this out and Ben pointed this out, the big flaw in that assumption, and it is a completely flawed assumption.
Right.
Most of the firms that we just get started in this process is that, Ben quoted, they had an 18% no answer rate. I showed you calls that were not answered, multiple calls that were not answered, hangups. Right. So assuming you have, like, what if you have 18% no answer or missed calls? You have 5% people who are on hold too long and they hang up. You have calls that are incorrectly attributed as good calls, because we all have heard those calls where the intake person just drops the ball in a great case. So the attorney assumes they're closing 97%. Yeah, when it gets to him, he closes. Second data point, average response time. Third data point, follow-up rate. Follow-up rate, question on that. For personal injury, if someone doesn't make a decision, like if you can't, you might be able to DocuSign them. Like if you can sign them while they're on the phone. Obviously, if it's a big case, you probably want to get out to them immediately. Like all the New York guys immediately send their investigator in a black car. Like that's the New York thing. A lot of attorneys like drop everything in a big case and get out to the hospital or get out to see the prospect. But what is the follow-up rate in personal injury? Like how many people typically you can't close on the phone, and how often should you follow up?
Well, you follow up consistently until, as Adam Reiman would say, they either buy, die, or unsubscribe, right? You're constantly following up. Now, Jay, let's go back real quickly, and I know we're short on time here, but it's how you are following up. It's how you are following up. Gary, the co-founder of Scalawble, is the best copywriter I've ever been around, and I've been in these waters a long time. And the content he sends makes people want to engage with you. And as I referenced earlier, Jay, so many attorneys are following up with the, hey, I'm still here, right? And that's just not going to do anything. Or, do you still need help? What does that mean, right? But Gary creates emails like, hey, there's something important you should know about your case, right? And people are like, wait, what should I know about my case, right? And it's content that we strategically build out for firms to where it's not just that, less, not very valuable information. And by the way, attorneys feel good that they're at least doing something. And by the way, I shouldn't discount that, because the fact is, at least they are doing something. At least they're doing, hey, I'm still here, but they're missing hundreds of thousands of dollars by not doing it the right way.
Awesome sauce. Well, thank you so much. That was a great share, great content. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and just introduce Adam. So Adam and I met relatively recently, but we've been on the phone a couple of times, and he was interviewed and on our 10 Golden Rules Internet Marketing for Law Firms podcast, which you can find on our YouTube channel, or on all the iTunes and Podbean and all your favorite podcast channels. So Adam, director of law firm growth at LegalSoft, and LegalSoft is a staffing company, but Adam's like the business coach. So he comes in and super passionate about improving your intake department, super passionate about helping you figure out your business processes for a law firm. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the screen and the mic over to him. Stop sharing. Adam, hit it.
Thanks, guys. God, I'm so happy to be here. And if I had to list the number of times I've batted in the batting order after Chad Kerby, I'm telling you, it's like hitting. It's like who hit after Babe Ruth. So the great thing about Chad is he's definitely passionate about the industry, about legal. He and I have been on the road for years together. It's so great to be back together. And Ben, the story that you told about your law firm is one that makes a guy like me get a tear in his eye. the activity that you've applied to intake, which is the most neglected part of every single law firm, it warms my heart, because so many of your colleagues in the industry, they struggle with, why is the firm down the road, down the street doing so much better than I am? And the reason that they are, it's not because they have better lawyers, guys and gals. It's because they have better processes. At the end of the day, processes rule the day. And Ben has narrowed it down statistically. And I'm going to dive into the weeds here with my deck and kind of share what I've been doing for the last 12 plus years in the industry. Let me get my presentation up. Everybody good? Let me put it in a viewable format. All right, intake fundamentals. This is a course that I've been teaching since 2012. I've been in the business since then. I am currently the director of law firm growth here at LegalSoft. Our company is, the hub of our company at LegalSoft is we provide virtual assistance in the legal space. And right now we're at about 800 law firms, and we have over 2,500 virtual assistants placed in these law firms. And we can place anything from legal assistants, intake staff, on all the way through to case managers, document collectors, up to virtual paralegals and attorneys. And that's the hub of our business. I'm the director of law firm growth, and ultimately I'm responsible for helping law firms grow. I've worked in over 200 law firms all across the country. Name the practice area, I've seen it and been involved in it as a coach. I facilitated a mastermind program for about 5 years, ironically with Chad Kerby in another life. And I created an intake fundamentals course that I've taught to over 1,300 law firms. And I have personally, as part of my team, we've secret shopped over 3,000 law firms. So I've really spent the bulk of my career looking into intake and treating it the way that it should be. It is the most critical part in a law firm, and it's also the most neglected, right? Lawyers simply bury their head in the sand. They take that strategy. They assume that things are going right. They don't do a deep dive like Ben has done in his firm, where he's listened to call recordings. He's tracking leads, right? The firm sounds like they live by a motto of, if it's not in lead docket, it didn't happen. These are the things that I preach as a coach. And when I do an intake analysis on it as an outsider, these are the things that I look for. These are the things that I preach, right? If you have a CRM, use it. If it's not in the CRM, it didn't happen, right? If it's not in your software. And so this is sort of an overview of the 8-week course that I've been teaching for more than 10 years now to those 1,300 law firms that I mentioned earlier. And these are the different topics that we cover. I won't dive too deep into it, but there has been some conversation a little bit earlier. Chad had mentioned that what they look at Scalawble, one of the things is the chase, right? What are the proper steps to following up with leads? How many times do I have to follow up with a lead? And Chad's right. Philosophically, and what I've always coached is, you pursue leads until they die, buy, or unsubscribe. Otherwise, you're not doing it justice. Now, I can tell you that 93% of all of your leads will convert within the first 6 touches. But there's a science to those 6 touches, right? What do I do? What do I say? What's the format? Do I call? Do I text? Do I send a courier? There's a method to the madness, and that's one of the things that I teach in my intake fundamentals course. I do a whole class on that. What are the best practices, right? And so lead conversion 101, this is like day one stuff that I teach in my courses. What's the definition of a lead? If I ask 10 law firm owners, what is your definition of a lead? 95% of the time they're going to say, well, we got 100 leads last month, but we really only wanted 20 of them. Right? We're pre-qualifying leads before we're even stepping up to the plate. And that's not a reality of what we should be doing. For purposes of calculating lead conversion, you have to start at the top of your 5-stage funnel. A lead is a lead is a lead. If you are a personal injury law firm and someone calls you and says that they have been injured, that is a lead. If they're a referral, that is a lead, right? So we all, there's a lot of pre-qualifying that goes on in the legal space. And for purposes of calculating lead conversion, you just can't do that. You just can't do that, or your data will not be accurate, as Ben will attest to, right? Ben shared his great story about his law firm and the way they've got that hockey stick growth going because they've They dove into the data, right? So how good are you at conversion, right? This comes up all the time. Law firm owners tell me all the time that they're supremely good. They're primo, they're top of the food chain when it comes to conversion. But most of the time they're off the mark. And it's because what law firm owners don't realize is that their law firm has a 5-stage funnel. And at the top of that funnel are leads. Second stage of that funnel are appointments that were set or DocuSigns that were sent out. In this world today, we still have to include that DocuSign piece, right? Third level is how many signed up at the consult or how many signed up when we sent the DocuSign out, right? And it goes on and on and on. What happens is law firm owners only remember the good ones. And so they hyper focus on, well, you know, we do a really, really good job of converting leads because they only remember the good ones. And what they don't realize is that there's actually 3 really critical stages before someone in the firm, someone actually consults with that person. There are 3 really, really critical stages that go on before that even happens. But of course, if I ask lawyers, they all say the same thing. We do a flawless job at conversion because again, we only remember the good things. And then the 5th stage, which is the little one at the bottom, that's the follow-up. Chad Kerby was talking about it earlier. What is your methodology to follow up? I'm going to share some crazy data with you guys today that will blow your socks off. Fix your follow-up. You're going to fix your lead, your revenue. Ben attested to that fact, right? And these are some things to think about after we get off today. I won't put you through your paces right now, but think about leads, right? How do you identify if they're qualified or not? What are the issues that you consider? What are the questions that you ask? Do you have standardized questions or scripts that you coach your people on, right? And ultimately, who in the firm makes the hire, no hire decision? These are just a thought question for you guys to think about after we get off today. Now we're going to get into the weeds. Number 1, there's got to be a sense of urgency with leads. And why is that? As some of the other panelists said today, we know for a fact that potential new prospects in the legal space are calling 5 to 7 law firms to get someone to take their case. Also keep in mind, all the good leads go first, okay? All the good leads go first. I don't know, Jay, probably multiple times in your career as a guy that's done some marketing for law firms, you'll get a phone call from a law firm owner that says, hey, the leads that you're generating for my firm are not very good, right? I always ask this, the first question that I ask is, how long does it take you to follow up with a lead? Keeping in mind that voicemail is where leads go to die. If a potential new client leaves a message with your firm, good luck. You're going to be chasing that lead, right? 5 to 7 law firms. So you've got to have a process in place, like Ben was talking about, with an 18% call abandonment rate, right? Just so you all know, somebody had asked this question earlier. Call centers in the US strive for a 1.5% call abandonment rate. That's what they strive for, 1.5%. Anything higher than that is considered a negative in the call center industry. So Ben was sitting at 18%. Obviously, he's not doing that today, but you can see how that there's a huge gap between 1.5% and 18%. So they addressed it in Ben's firm and look at the results, right? The number 1 factor in lead conversion, as you can see on this slide, is speed to lead. At the end of the day, no matter who you talk to, speed to lead is the number 1 factor in lead conversion. You have minutes to convert a lead. As you can see on this very simple chart, if you're waiting 24 hours to follow up with a lead, an initial lead that came in that you haven't spoken to, your conversion plummets to just 17%. Okay, let that soak in a little bit. This is the reality of the industry that we're in now. When it was legal for law firms to start advertising, the whole game changed, unfortunately, right? Potential new prospects, PNCs, believe that legal services are a commodity item. Again, I hate to say that because they're not. We all know that no 2 law firms are alike in the way that clients get results, get treated, et cetera, But at the end of the day, it is a full contact sport, and you have minutes, not hours, not days to respond to a lead before they start to get really, really cold. Okay, Velocify, this was a study that I participated in. We looked at 3.5 million leads, and this is what came out of months and months of call tracking, call recordings. Speed to lead is the number one factor, and it has been that way for more than a dozen years in the industry, right? So fix your processes and you'll sign up more clients. Okay. Here's a little quiz question for you that'll kind of knock your socks off. How long does it take for the average law firm to call a prospect back? Now, I want to start by saying if I ask 10 law firm owners, 8 of them will tell me we call all of our leads back within 24 to 48 hours. Okay. So think in your head, how long does it take the average law firm to call a prospect back? It is 3.6 days. It takes 3.6 days for the average law firm to call a prospect back across all practice areas in the US. Let's scroll back really quickly to this. If you're waiting 3.6 days to call your leads back, you may as well not call them, because as you can see, guys and gals, your conversion is less than 17% after just 24 hours. Law firms are waiting far too long to call a lead back. Mind-blowing, right? 3.6 days. So who's left at 3.6 days? Who's left? Clients that have called 10 different law firms. Someone slipped and fell in a Taco Bell. There were no witnesses. They didn't file an accident report, and they didn't go to the doctor. That's who's left after 3.6 days, right? Remember, all the good leads go first. Everyone wants to hunt whales in this industry. And it doesn't matter what practice area you're in, but we're going to use personal injury since Ben is here. Whales are sedentary creatures. They move very, very slowly. So you cannot bank the future of your firm on whales. Whales are amazing. Look at Ben's data. He said we didn't have any 7-figure cases last year, right? Those would be considered whales in his practice area. There are very, very few of them, right? But if you're waiting 3.6 days or more to call a lead back, you've got to fix that process. And that's one of the things that I do as a coach when we dive in. It's what Chad does. It's what Ben is already applying in his firm, which is overwhelming. This is a Secret Shopper report card. Me and my team have secret shopped over 3,000 law firms. And Chad was talking earlier about Cheesecake Factory. What I coach as a coach is In-N-Out Burger. I don't know if you're familiar with In-N-Out Burger, but if you've ever been in one, it is simplicity. Simplicity rules the day. Chad was talking about it earlier. We make it so hard for potential new clients to do business with us. Keep it simple. Boil it down to these 10 factors on intake, and you will sign up more clients than ever before. Look, Ben is a testimonial to this. If you apply some of the tenets that I've just coached here today, you will improve your conversion by 128% simply by applying some of these things, and you will not have to spend one more dime on marketing to get it done. Ben talked about it earlier. They didn't spend one more dime on marketing, and they had massive triple-digit increases 2 years in a row. And it's not a fluke. It's because he looked at the overall leads, call abandonment rates. They just made tweaks one bite at a time to get to that level of perfection. Here's the amazing thing. 3,000 secret shopper calls and counting that we've done in my career. The average score on a 100-point scale is somewhere between a 30 and a 40. Law firms have consistently scored between a 30 and a 40 in the 3,000 plus secret shopper calls that me and my team have done. Thankfully, right? For us, it keeps us in business, but the numbers have not changed in more than 10 years. Okay? Not one iota. Okay. If anybody's on today's call, and I'm just going to extend it just to the folks here, and I know Chad extended an audit as well. If any of you would be interested in either a complimentary strategy session to talk about some of the best ways you can grow and scale your law firm, I'm more than happy to hop on a complimentary call. And or if you'd like me to secret shop your law firm and share those results with you, more than happy to do that so that we can help you start getting on the road to fixing your follow-up, fixing your intake, signing up more clients than ever before. Oh, and not having to spend any more money on marketing to get it done. Ben is a testament to that today. And that's my phone number, adam@legalsoft.com. I am looking forward, hopefully, to hear from some of you today. More than happy to provide you with that. And I will now hand it back to the big guy.
Adam, that was awesome. Thanks so much. And one of the things they tell us in public speaking is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And I think this was a really great example where you guys heard you heard from someone who's really doing it. You heard from two experts, and we heard some really consistent themes, right? We heard answer the phone. We heard, hey, guess what? You don't actually answer the phone as much as you think. And then we heard you don't actually convert as many calls as you think. You don't actually have your processes dialed in. And so, we heard do an audit, take advantage. The guys offered you all a free, audit or test call. Definitely take advantage of it. And by the way, I didn't even tell you, hopefully many of you know, but 10 golden rules, we do internet marketing for law firms. And the reason why we think this is so important is that we see so many times where we drive an increased number of calls, an increased number of leads, and the firms don't convert at a high enough percent, and they're not satisfied. So I have a couple more questions, and then we got a bunch of questions that have been coming in from LinkedIn and coming in on the chat. And if you're on the call with us today, please don't hesitate to either drop a Q&A or drop a chat and a question for the panel. So one thing I wanted to talk about, and we didn't address this directly, but I've heard this, if not 100 times, I've heard it a dozen times, that a lot of firms, the intake department is run by the paralegals, and the paralegals are super busy, and the last thing they want to do is sign up yet another client. And we even face that in our company. Like, we had to develop an intake process, an onboarding process, because our account teams are typically busy. The last thing they wanted to do was worry about like figuring out access and Google codes and all this stuff. So when we do that, we have a separate group that does the onboarding, so that, because there's a natural rejection of new business. So the paralegals are rejecting deals. So who wants to take this one? Like, let me give it to Gary first, because Gary didn't get a chance.
Yeah, go Gary.
Gary, who should answer the calls, and what's the difference between lawyers and paralegals taking the calls and professional intake folks?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think we're all loving Ben today. I took over 4 pages of notes on the brilliance that you dropped, and I really like what Ben said, and it's something that we preach as well, and that is, it should not be the paralegal, and it definitely should not be the attorney. We spend most of our focus making sure that, the law firm kind of operates like almost like a professional sports team, where the attorney is both the owner and player coach. And what we want them to realize and see is that you need to have specific players for each position, and we want to train to that. So much like Ben had shared early, we're ardent believers in making sure that the intake specialist or the sales team has one focus, and that is to do that job, that position, whether it's intake or sales, and really focus on, as Chad had said earlier, on practicing every single day, so that their skill sets can get better and improve. Because listen, professional athletes aren't practicing every day because they have nothing better to do. It's building those habits inside, and so that you can do these things without even thinking it, helps cut down that other part that Ben had shared earlier, and that's the fact that it's just a high burnout position, right? So you have to make sure that they're comfortable, and so really just specializing and focusing on that one job is is how you
Adam,
get the best results.
That's
Adam,
great.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
So
You had an
yeah, I was
answer.
going to just dovetail off of Gary. That's great feedback, Gary. That's spot on. I was working in a firm in the Midwest, personal injury firm. They had a team of 6 paralegals that they had doing intake, and the law firm owner felt that was a point of friction, as Ben talked about earlier, in their firm. And after doing a deep dive into the call recordings from that group, we found out a couple of really interesting things. One, when the phone would ring in that queue, the paralegals essentially would dive under their desk to avoid having to take those calls. Why? And Ben touched on it a little bit, but it's even more than that. Listen, paralegals are the lifeblood of a lot of law firms. In fact, my wife's a lawyer, and her paralegal was our maid of honor in our wedding. But I could tell you, my wife would not have her paralegal doing intake because paralegals just view it as new clients as more work, right? The only one making money off this new client is Ben over here, right? Jane, the paralegal, is struggling to pay her bills, or really frustrated. It's more work, right? So at the end of the day, getting paralegals out of that. Plus, it's not they're not naturally salespeople by trade, and so the intake role is specialized. When you get to 100 leads per month, you need to really have an intake specialist that does just intake and follow up. That's it, right?
That's a great point. I've never heard that number. We've got a question from Mohammed. What's the best form of follow-up with automation? Text, email, calls, or a combination of all three? And I'll mention something I heard, and maybe you guys can validate it for me, because we have market data, but we don't have the amount of data y'all have. I've heard of the 3-2-1 format. So a lot of people will, for 3 days, will call 3 times, text 3 times, call 3 times. And what you have to do a lot of times, we all do this now. There's so much junk that comes through your phone, your cell phone, that you call, then you text and you say, hey, this is Jay calling from the 10 Golden Rules firm, or this is Candace calling from the Pope Law firm, and I'm going to call you again, so please pick up because I'm responding to your inquiry. So you do that version of 3 for 3 days, then you do the call and text for 2 days, the 2, and then you do the 1. You call every day until someone kicks you out, or maybe you give up at 3 months or 6 months. What do y'all think? How would you answer Mohammed's question and my theory?
Jay, I think the thing that I would share most is that you really have to take a look at the practice area, because it really does depend on the practice area. And I'll give you just one example before we open it up to the others. But, family law happens to be one of those practice areas where, you probably would never really stop, or it should be for a protracted period of time, because, the habits of somebody seeking a divorce attorney, as we all know, in the heat of the moment, they may reach out to a divorce attorney, and then, how many times are they going to reconcile and work things out? And sometimes that can go on for years and years. So while the way that you follow up with somebody who's been in your system like that, and kudos to Ben saying how important it is to keep everybody in there, because while we're not going to be as tenacious with the schedule that you suggested, you want to certainly stay in front of that person until, as Adam had said, buy, die, or unsubscribe. But certainly criminal, I think we can all see how there's a time urgency there, and same thing with personal injury. So it varies from practice area to practice area.
And what do you guys do? What's your cadence?
Yeah, so I think email out of the 3 you mentioned has probably been the least successful for us this year in terms of the chase process. One thing we're really leaning into now is something Chad touched on earlier, which I think is spot on. Is what is that follow-up message that you're sending? For a year and a half, we had the "we're still here" type message, and I just don't think that's very effective. And so now, actually, after this webinar, I've got to go film a bunch of videos. We're really leaning into more of the graphics and more of the videos, and tailoring video messages to specific case types, to specific demographics, and really just trying to think outside the box a little bit. Are they more likely to click a video, link than they are, just read a text message? But for us, a combination of the calls, and I think the text messages and really nailing that message is what gets us back in the door more than anything else. And also the timing of it. You know, if you call somebody and they don't answer at 9:30 in the morning and you call them at 9:30 the next morning, they're probably not going to answer again. And, you know, there's certain people we found that if we hit them with the chase messages at 6 p.m. instead of, you know, 9:30, there's a higher likelihood they're going to pick up and, you know, respond. And so I think really, you know, thinking outside the box on what that message is, and then, you know, really controlling when they're getting it and not necessarily doing that the same way, the same time.
Awesome, guys. Well, we're right at time. So I want to thank you all for being here. Everyone's contact information was shared. If y'all are watching this on YouTube, just rewind and hit the time slot. But thank you all so much for being here, guys. Thank you so much for your time. This was invaluable. I'm sure we'll get tens of thousands of YouTube views. And everyone, please take action with this stuff. It's gold. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, guys.